Hello, everybody, and welcome back to CXQA Live, the show where we have a weekly live discussion where we get the opportunity to talk to some real thought leaders in the CX industry. And here on CXQA Live, we believe that your agents that have the right tools, training, and connection with your company will be a revenue growth and protection center for your brand, will be the best diagnostic tool you have for your business. They'll ensure that your customers are satisfied and stay connected with your brand. They'll produce more and better work, and they're actually going to want to stay and contribute to the well being of your company. Now, I'm sure this man sitting here beside me virtually needs no introduction. You guys know Jeremy. He has been on the show for a multitude of episodes, and we absolutely love having you here, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Jacob with a K, my man. It's good to be here.
I know this is actually the first episode that we've actually been able to record where it's been you and me having a discussion.
It's exciting.
We were supposed to have one, I think it was a couple months ago, but then we had a little bit of emergency situation, and I think Rob took over the recording for that. So Shout out to Rob Connolly for also being incredible and incredibly flexible and allowing me to be transparent with what was going on in my situation so that he could step in. Now, speaking of transparency, Jeremy, did you like the segue there?
Yeah. Nice.
That is what today's topic is all about. We are talking about being able to address your contact center team with transformative transparency. So, Jeremy, let's just go ahead and kick it off here. We're not going to beat around the bush. Let's just dive in. Why exactly do contact center teams need to get that kind of level of transparency that's being talked about above? Like, it's the end of the year. Everybody's kind of going into review with what's going well, what's not going well. Why is it that our service and support teams need to be in on the loop on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, why is transparency important? Do they need to know everything? Do they need to know all the big things that we're talking about, we're looking at? For a while now, we've been talking about how important it is to have satisfied, engaged team members, and how when they're satisfied and they're engaged, they're going to work harder and they're going to deliver better service to our customers, all those sorts of things. And so at a high level, I think that's part of the reason. More specifically, though, I mean, one reason for being as transparent as you possibly can, it reduces uncertainty. Any place where you leave doubt, you leave opportunity for rumors and assumptions and people maybe making up their own stories in their own mind about what something means to them, especially when we think about change. If something's going to be changing or there's something new that's being introduced, there's a lot of scary emotions that are tied to that. And if we're not super clear and super transparent about what it is, why it is, what does it mean to you, then all of a sudden you've got all of this noise happening because people don't understand it and they start to fear
it. I think everybody knows the expression, but there is a very common expression that talks about what happens when we assume. I cannot repeat it here on the show. I'm sure most people know what it is, but that's very true. Like, there are a lot of things that don't get communicated, that don't trickle down, and that just kind of leaves your team guessing, and that kind of leaves the place for doubt and fear to come in, especially, not to sound cliche, but in today's day and age, especially with AI that's on the move. A lot of contact centers are trying to figure out how to incorporate AI. And, our agents are very intelligent people. It's not like they're just sitting there waiting to be told what to do. They are also on the lookout for how they can better themselves and what they can do. And they're aware of things like this happening. So I think when it comes to when we talk about change management and we talk about big changes happening, it's so important to be so transparent with your agents and to just let them know what's going on. So that way, you don't have any unnecessary fear that's going through your contact center, because we know that with fear and doubt, there's no good fruit that comes from that for your agents, for anybody who's managing your agents, and especially for your customers.
Well, and
And
I'll
yeah,
give you an example on that, Jacob. So we have a BPO partner that we work with on a pretty small scale. They account for roughly 8% of our output, so it's small, right? Um, but anytime you have a BPO partnership, it's really common for your employees, for your team members to worry about that. What does that mean? Are they going to be replacing us? That sort of thing. And so we created an article within our knowledge base that just talks about that relationship and says things like, you do not need to be worried about them replacing you because they're not going to. They are not here to replace any of our wonderful employees. They are just a feather in our cap in terms of our overall staffing strategy. And while there might be some growth in the future that happens with them, their growth does not come at the expense of you. And so I think just trying to like continually, again, be transparent, say things out loud that maybe you don't have to, but are just good for the team, and again, get rid of some of that doubt that they may otherwise have.
so that's kind of an interesting point that you make, Jeremy, and that really kind of gets me thinking about something else I want to talk about in regards to this topic. Is how do you know, or how does your agent know that you're not just telling them what they want to hear, right? You kind of have to create this culture, and I know you do, Jeremy. You're an incredible leader in the contact center, but you really have to create that culture where you have been transparent and honest in the past, and you kind of have to get that internal buy-in from your employees as well. And I think when you kind of create that space where you're just constantly keeping these guys in the loop, you're being very open and honest about everything, then that's another great way to kind of squash that doubt that can creep in as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to make sure that your actions match your words. And so to your point, you could tell them lots of things, but if those things aren't true, or if your actions tell them something different, then at some point they will not believe the things that you're telling them. And so you have to make sure that those your actions and your words are always in lockstep. We said we're going to do A, we did A. We said we're going to do B, we're going to do B. If something changes, you tell them something changes. But yeah, you don't. That's the only way to get that buy-in and get that trust and make sure that they actually believe what you're saying.
No, you're absolutely right. And very quickly, I did just want to point out, Shafiq did ask you a question, Jeremy. When you're doing these comparisons, right? Are you doing a side by side comparison of what the average individual rep does internally against the BPO? Like, is that something that's going on right now?
Yeah, and actually, so every week I do a weekly email to the entire department, and I do most weeks a brief video that's kind of a recap of my email as well. I know people probably don't want to read my entire email, but every week that weekly email shows performance by each team side by side. So what did our agents do? What did their agents do? What are their post interaction surveys for last week? What were our post interaction surveys for last week? So not only do I look at it and do me and my leaders look at it, but that's another place where I tried to show side by side for the entire team performance of each. And we tend to be about the same in most things. We're not always spot on, but we tend to perform relatively the same to each other. And I think that's important for people to see so they don't, again, there's just this thing that happens naturally where we worry about the other, and then we start to assume that they're worse than we are and that sort of thing. And so if we can take away the threat and be transparent about the performance, then people don't have to worry about that.
Now, something else that's very important when we kind of talk about transparency, and I mentioned creating a culture where agents feel comfortable and like they have that buy-in with your brand, is the ability to kind of collect, and you touched on this a little bit, but collect some of that feedback as well. Because we all know that without agents, you really don't have much of a business. Yes, without the customers, you don't, but without anybody to deal with the customers, you can't really operate a business either. So, what are some really good ways to collect the feedback, and how do we kind of identify what's valuable that's going to help those agents kind of be able to contribute to or understand the changes going on?
Yeah. Um, so a couple things on that. I mean, we do things again that are year round in terms of collecting feedback and making sure that there is a venue for folks to share their thoughts and their ideas with us. So I've written about our voice of the agent process, which is essentially like a virtual suggestion box. That's happening all the time. Every week we're looking at those, responding to those, recapping it for the department. We have agent engagement teams and that sort of thing. But on an annual basis, like many, we do an employee satisfaction survey. And there's a lot of really great information that comes out of that. And so our process around that is, we do the survey. We've got a mix of closed-ended and open-ended questions. So, some might be rate 1 through 5 or good or bad. And some might just be, tell us what makes it easy to do your job. Tell us what makes it hard to do your job. Um, and so we go through all of the responses and we start to identify what are the things that are trending within the responses, the places where we're shining and the places where we have opportunity to improve. And we boil that down into a few specific focus areas. It tends to be 3 or 4 focus areas. And then from there, identify specific commitments. Here's the things that we're going to do in each of these focus areas. Now, something that we did, or we're doing, I should say, this year that's different than the last couple of years. The last several years, we took that feedback, we identified the focus areas, and we came up with the commitments ourselves at a leadership team, which is okay. This year, though, we're going and saying, okay, now that we have these focus areas, we've identified the trends based on what you've told us. You tell us, what are your ideas on how you think we can improve in these areas? What are the commitments that you think that we should make? And so that's the process we're going through right now, which is one-on-ones, huddle sessions, Microsoft Teams chats, that sort of thing, saying, here are the 4 focus areas that trended the most, where we think we have the most opportunity to be effective, collect our ideas. And so then we'll go through the ideas and, again, boil that down. Each focus area will have probably 1 to 3 commitments, and we'll assign those specific leaders. We'll check in on them at least monthly, and then making sure that we're communicating all of the action that's taking place as part of that plan throughout the year.
That is probably to some people kind of crazy to hear. How dare you go to the front line and get actual like firsthand feedback from the people that deal with this on a daily basis? Like why aren't you letting like the executives above kind of make their own decisions on what to do? But jokes aside, we know how important it is to kind of get this feedback from the agents. We know that they are, like I said, the people who get that firsthand information. And if you, as a leader, kind of have that level of transparency when it comes to these big changes, then your agents will feel compelled to be transparent with you as well. Because I said it once, I'll say it again. They have that buy in with you. They know that you're going to take care of them no matter what happens. But let's kind of flip this around a little bit, Jeremy. This is great that your company is doing this, and I love it. I'd love to hear it. I love that you're getting some actionable feedback, goodness, from your agents. But why aren't more companies doing this? Why aren't contact centers like giving their front line this level of access?
I mean, I think there's a few reasons, and I think the reasons can vary from organization to organization. I mean, some places just don't have a culture of transparency and sharing information, which trickles down. Um, you know, a couple of things that I think are really common, though, just throughout is, if we're being honest, frankly, just sometimes the whirlwind of the day. We're going from one urgent situation to the next. We're putting out fires, and sometimes we kind of lose sight of the big important things and making sure that we're effectively communicating them, especially in advance, to our team members. Sometimes too, what I found when I was a frontline agent, I think I often felt like I didn't have the information I needed, or I wasn't being told about what was happening. I wasn't being told about things that are going to be coming, down the line. And it seemed like this very like kind of binary, easy, like either you communicate something or you don't, and you're choosing not to. The reality, I think, though, that I learned as I started to become in positions where I had information is it's not always clear when is the right time to communicate something, or what is necessary, what is important. So let's say there's some sort of a project that's happening over the course of the next 12 months, for example. And and when you're part of that project, what you find is things are often changing and iterating. And so I think we often find ourselves saying, well, we don't want to communicate too much too early for fear that it could change. And then we have to go back and try to correct something that we've already said. Or what if it doesn't come to fruition? And so like there's all of these things where I'm trying to assess, do I know enough? Is this information solid enough? Is it going to change? Do they need it now, or should they learn about it closer to when the thing happens? And so I think through that process of filtering and just being hit with a barrage of information as leaders, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and it's just not clear when is the right time to share.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of like what you had to say there. I was honestly a little bit cynical, kind of bringing that up and saying like, oh, well, it's just that companies don't care. It's not really a matter of not caring. It's just a matter of capacity, right? Maybe you're just too busy with what's going on with the day to day. Maybe, like you said, there's the possibility that these things that you want to put in place are actually going to go into place, and you're not going to know that till right before it happens, as things often happen. And it kind of, we talk about that ambiguity. And I think, the more transparent you are with your team, and even if you say things like, hey, there's a possibility that this could happen, that's still kind of, well, now they're saying, oh, well, there's a possibility. So it might happen, it might not happen, it might affect me, it might not affect me. So I think that's a good reason too. Just maybe that's why it's not being so not being communicated in the way that you happen to with your team. Now,
Right.
kind of going off of that feeling of you know getting caught up in that day to day. Um, something that you and I talked about a little bit before the show is being able to communicate the most important question, which we all know is the why. Why do we do what we do? So how do we kind of maintain that spirit even when we get caught up in all the hustle and bustle of what's going on? How do we kind of more effectively communicate with our team and kind of remind them the why we are the way we are and what we do, or why we do what we do? How do we kind of keep that from not getting lost on the agents?
Well, Rob Dwyer actually said something in the chat here that I think is kind of a perfect opening to your question there. And he said, good communication is thoughtfully planned, and sometimes you don't get around to planning. 100%. Like if with anything, like, do you have a plan? If you don't have a plan, what are the chances that you're going to effectively execute? And I found that to be very, very true. In a couple places where I've worked, my current organization and a past organization, we over time we put a lot of thought into communication. Who, when, why, how, where. Where should people expect to get information so it's not a surprise? They always know where to look, that sort of thing. But part of that process is defining some like roles and responsibilities and process around it. So having a person or team of people that is often, if not exclusively, responsible for communication, coming up with a communication plan. That's something we've been doing more and more as of late. I think we've to this point spent a lot of time thinking about communication, and so we've been able to do a pretty good job of it. But now we've taken that to kind of the next iteration, which is working with a communication specialist that we have within our team. It's a role that we have defined within our team, and saying, hey, can you help us come up with a communication plan for this topic? And so I was talking about our employee survey process, for example. So they're currently working on a communication plan. In years past, I think that's one of the areas where we've not done so great and been as diligent. We would do the survey and communicate a lot around that time. We would get the results and we would communicate what the results were. We would come up with the plan and communicate the plan. And then we would kind of go silent. We were doing the stuff. We were executing on the commitments that we made, but we weren't telling people and reminding them of it. So we might go 6-9 months with no communication, even though we're taking action. And we might even be communicating the thing that we said we were going to do, but not saying, you said this, and as a result, we did that. And so now we're coming up with a communication plan so that we know this is when we're going to communicate, who's going to communicate, who is the audience, what is the frequency. But yeah, so that, I think that's a really big piece, is like having a plan, having a process, and having some clear responsibilities. One of the other things that you and I talked about, just in terms of kind of communicating the big and trying to talk about why and kind of connect the importance of the work that we do. For the last couple of years, we've been doing at the end of the year, we get to the end of the year and we start doing like annual reviews and we start thinking about New Year's resolutions. I know you brought up New Year's resolutions, but end of the year, beginning of the year is kind of a nice time to reflect on the previous year and look ahead to the coming year. And so that's something that we've been doing for our team for the last couple of years, a recap of the year that we're closing out, what went well, what didn't, what did we accomplish? And then looking ahead to the coming year, what are the things that I'm excited for, that we're excited for, that we expect to be happening in this coming year? And again, these are the sorts of conversations that often aren't happening broadly and aren't happening with the frontline team members. And so we've been trying to kind of create this annual thing where we do that. We're going to close out the year. We're going to acknowledge where we could have been better. We're going to celebrate the wins that we had. And now let's talk about the things that we should be excited for in the coming year.
So here's kind of a not necessarily off the wall question, but when we kind of talk about bigger picture, right? It's always so easy for us that know what it's like to be in the contact center, and those of us who are just aware of how people are, how people behave. When we talk about kind of this bigger picture goal, what we're all working towards, what we always want to keep in mind, and to make sure that that's being communicated to our team, how do we, I don't want to say quantify, but how can we translate or communicate this, all of this work that we're doing to kind of keep everybody on the same page? How do we communicate that to the board? How do we communicate that to the people who have the power? Like how can we get the buy-in, so to speak, from our executives into saying, yeah, it's a good idea to invest this into your team?
I think this came up on a previous episode about a month back or so. We were in our kind of roundtable after the show itself, and there was a discussion that was similar to this. I think it's really important that you understand what moves the needle in your organization. And each organization is different. Some it'll be financial in nature, it'll be bottom line, it'll be cost, revenue, etc. For others, it might be about culture, employee satisfaction, retention, attrition. For others, it might be customer focused. And many are somewhere in the middle, right? Maybe they're not extreme on financial and they're not extreme on just make the customer or the employee happy. They're somewhere kind of in the middle. But I think step number one is you have to understand what the executive team and or the board cares about. Because if they care about, let's say you're on one side of the extreme where financials are the end all be all, right? Bottom line, revenue, cost. And you show up and you go, look how happy our people are with nothing else. And they go, that's cool. We don't hate it, but why do I care? So I think it's understanding what moves the needle and then being able to quantify and put kind of business outcome measures to it. So if our people are really happy, that's cool. That's great. Why do we care? Well, our attrition is reduced in half. We are spending way less on hiring and training and unproductive time. That results in X. That results in Y. But again, like starting out, understanding what moves the needle, understanding how to quantify it for people, because they're not as close to these things as we are. And so we have to be able to put it into quantifiable measures that align to the overall goals and objectives of the organization.
Now, when we talk about being able to communicate, right? You said you have a communication specialist that communicates to the team. Is that communication specialist still going to be the one that communicates to your executives as well? Like, I like what Mark said here, and I do want to go back to this. He did say this a few minutes ago. Who owns the communication in your organization, but in the organization? Does communication use the same media to ensure that the people that are receiving it can ingest that messaging?
So the second part of that question, I think, is a really fabulous one, which is essentially how do we communicate things? Is it email? Is it Slack? Is it town halls, videos, etc.? Knowledge base. I mean, there's a million different ways to do it. I think that's part of the process that each organization needs to go through is to identify and define what are the right ways of communicating things. What you probably should not do is be constantly changing how you're communicating things because people never know what to expect. And if people don't like quote unquote live in certain places from a communication perspective, and that's where you go and communicate something, they're going to miss the message. With that said, you also can't assume that one channel will work for everyone. So again, there's a lot of thought, like, is there a place that's a kind of central place of truth? Are there one or two places where we are consistently sharing messages? So I mentioned earlier, I do a weekly email, and most of the time, I followed up with a video. And the thought behind that is, well, one, it's consistent. Those are the two ways. Those weekly messages are always communicated those two places, those two ways. That never changes. So if you want to know how we performed last week, how our BPO partner performed last week, and the things that I'm calling out as hot topics, trends, projects to be aware of, etc., you don't have to wonder where to go and look for that information. However, you can choose to consume it in an email that admittedly is kind of lengthy because it has, 2 to 3 topics that I'm discussing plus performance for like 4 or 5 different areas. What did the contact center look like? What was trending on social media? What were we getting complaints about? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of lengthy. But you can choose to digest it that way if that's the type of medium that you do well with digesting, or you can watch me recap it in a 2 to 3 minute video. So it's not to say you can only communicate one way per se, but there should be consistency in where people expect to find information and to find messages.
And really, the only way that you're going to be able to tap into that consistency is kind of like what we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, where you kind of create this culture of transparency, where you really get to know what it is that your agents need because you've been so transparent with them with what's going on. And then in turn, they get to be transparent with you. So, Jeremy, I seriously cannot believe it. It's already been 30 minutes, and I'm just kind of sitting here like, wow, I feel like it's been maybe 10. So, unfortunately, we are out of time for this episode. But, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here, man. It is always a pleasure to have you on the show. And guys, if you do have a little bit of extra time after the show, we do have our little post discussion at the post discussion table. So if you've got time, please feel free to drop by. We'll just be kind of chatting it up there and maybe taking this conversation into a whole nother level. We'll see. Who knows? But if you do have to drop, thank you so much for being here. Jeremy, again, always a pleasure.
Yeah, ditto.
All right, guys. We will see you next week. Make sure to go do something awesome today. And we'll see you with the group chat. See ya.